Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but in our history of being alive on this great big planet, we as a people have done some pretty horrible things. While you might know about the more commonly fought wars and tragic events, other horrific facts are left behind in time, until now. Here's 10 disturbing historical facts. People have lost their lives in millions of ways, each more horrific than the last, but few rival executions by elephant. Sadly popular in parts of Southeast Asia for thousands of years, this lasted until the 19th century, when fortunately it was phased out, for our sake and the poor elephants. The way these elephants would go about doing it is as expected. When you have multiple tons of weight, any kinds of force will crush a human. And the modern world learned that when this photo by French adventurer Louis Rousselet was published in his journal Le Tour du Monde back in 1868. Past accounts have backed up these claims, as those who set sail and ended up in areas that are now modern-day India, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, and Vietnam all witnessed this horrific act. So what would earn someone the distinction of being elephantized? Well, for one, you could have had the unfortunate distinction of being an enemy soldier, but in the end, it was up to the royals, so you could get squished for something as small as tax evasion back then. But it wasn't all squishing. Some cultures preferred the use of tusks, in particular Sri Lanka, who would attach even sharper ends to the beast's tusks, allowing for some serious interior decorating. Whether it was torture or worse, these beasts deserved better, and I'm glad they're getting that now, unless they're in a circus. There are a few things more annoying than flies that won't leave you alone, and this isn't a new frame of thought. Ancient Egyptians would more than agree with me, but one pharaoh by the name of Pepi II found a way of fly catching quite a bit different from what I'd be comfortable doing. See, Pepi II was an interesting ruler, taking the throne at the age of 6 and demanding constant attention, but one day he decided that he needed a use for the slaves who weren't on pyramid duty, so he decided he wanted them to become fly magnets, and they do that by becoming slathered in honey. So while the flies were busy circling around those less fortunate than the pharaoh, he'd be able to engage in the activities that he preferred without any insect interruptions. And those activities include at one point having his men capture a pygmy, or it was just a short person, so that they could come and entertain the court. Pepi II was ruler for a long time, with some sources saying around 64 years, so that's a whole lot of honey. And also, if you're wondering how old Pepi was when he ordered for the pygmy capture, he was 8. He was an 8-year-old pharaoh, and that wasn't even the craziest thing about him. I can read one language fluently, and that's English. Call me bilingual, but I can read it in both Canadian and American. But even using my fine-tuned linguistic expertise, I still can't quite figure out what the text on the Voynich manuscript means. And if you can't either, you're not alone. Carbon dated to somewhere in the 15th century, no one has ever been able to translate the words inside this book, as the language, which has been dubbed Voyage, has left everyone dumbfounded for over 100 years. The name Voynich comes from the bookseller Wilfred M. Voynich, who acquired the book in 1912, but he, nor anyone who he showed it to, could make any sense of the script, drawings, and colorful characters. Like the book itself, its history is also confusing. Researchers know at one point it belonged to German Emperor Rudolf II in the late 1500s, and about 100 years later, Jesuit scholar Athanasius Kircher had it in his possession. Then it traveled to Voynich, who purchased it from the Jesuit college in 1912, until Voynich passed, in which it was given to his wife, then H.P. Krauss, until its current location at Yale University. Feel free to read it for yourself and try to make sense of it. You would certainly impress me. World War II ended in the 1940s for most people, and I say most because one man thought it was ongoing until his return home in 1974. That man's name? Hiro Enoda. So here's the story. Enoda was stationed on Lubang, a tiny island in the Philippines during the final days of the war. A few weeks before his arrival, US troops forced most of his fellow Japanese combatants into the jungle, where they were likely captured or executed. But not Enoda. He stayed hidden and continued his country's secret mission, holding the island until Imperial forces retrieved him later. But here's the thing. They declared him dead in 1959, so unbeknownst to him, they had no plans of coming anytime soon. So, while living there, along with his comrade Kinshichi Kozuka, search parties tried to find them, but Enoda assumed them to be Japanese prisoners forced against their will, so he forced them to leave. Kozuka eventually lost his life in October of 1972, but Enoda remained on the island alone for another 18 months, before an encounter with a Japanese explorer named Norio Suzuki resulted in an agreement. If Suzuki could bring Enoda's commanding officer to Lubang with direct orders to lay down arms, he would comply. So he did, and Enoda's war came to an end on March 9th, 1974. Enoda received a hero's welcome when he returned to Japan, despite all the controversy behind his past, and now he is a best-selling memoir. What a weird life. Continuing on the theme of wars, we're going to keep this one short. What do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to be talking about a war that lasted for somewhere between 38 and 45 minutes, and yet resulted in tons of casualties. The Anglo Zanzibar War took place starting at 9 in the morning on August 27, 1896, and by 9:38, one British soldier was wounded and 500 Zanzibaris, soldier or civilian, had been injured or lost their life. The conflict arose due to a succession dispute following the death of Sultan Hamad bin Thuwani. The British favored Sultan Hamud bin Muhammad Muhammad, who was seen as more compliant with British interests, while Khalid bin Bargash declared himself the Sultan against the wishes of the British. Tensions escalated when he refused to step down as Sultan, despite the British ultimatum to do so. So in response, the British Royal Navy dispatched warships to the harbor of Zanzibar. They gave him an ultimatum demanding his forces to stand down and recognize the authority of Sultan Hamud. When the ultimatum's deadline passed, the British ships opened fire on the Sultan's palace and other defensive positions. Around 40 minutes later, his forces were defeated, the palace was destroyed, and Khalid fled seeking refuge in the German consulate. And then Zanzibar went under British rule. So sorry, no happy ending. There's one important rule when it comes to war. Make sure you're targeting the other guys. Well, that wasn't the case during the Battle of Karansebes, which turned out to be the easiest victory for the Ottoman Empire ever. Here's how the story goes. The Austrian army, comprised of soldiers from various regions and speaking different languages, camped near the town of Karansebes in modern-day Romania. While scouting for enemy forces, a group of Austrian forces encountered a group of Gypsy traders. A dispute arose over alcohol, and during the altercation, a shot was fired. But that led to confusion among the Austrian troops, who mistook the commotion for an enemy attack. In the ensuing chaos, soldiers began attacking one another, believing they were being assaulted by the Ottoman army, who had infiltrated their ranks. The conflict escalated rapidly, with soldiers in the Austrian ranks turning on one another, causing significant casualties and disorder within their own army. As a result of the internal strife, the Ottoman forces, who were actually nowhere near the scene initially, eventually took advantage of the disarray and exploited the situation to their benefit. Now, details are murky about how many people lost their lives and how legitimate the claims are, but it's estimated that it was up to 10,000, and all because some guys got plastered. But the Ottoman Empire put it in the win column, and that's where it stays to this day. See, I don't know what's more shocking, the fact that human zoos once existed, or the fact that they remained in existence until the early 20th century, with the last one taking place as recently as 1958. These displays would feature people from throughout the world, often shown as primitive and savage. So zoo curators decided that the easiest way was to kidnap people from their home countries, with the end result being thousands of individuals from Africa, Asia, and the Americas living in extremely inhumane conditions while touring the United States and parts of Europe. For the Americans watching, one name that should be learned is that of Ota Benga. Benga was a man from the Mabuti Pygmy tribe, which is now Democratic Republic of Congo, who was put on display at the Bronx Zoo as an exhibit. He would later be placed in a cage with chimpanzees before ultimately placing him with an orangutan named Dohong, with whom he'd spend most of his life. As expected, people took offense to this and soon the exhibit closed, but not before becoming an infamous part of the zoo. Benga took his own life in 1916, unable to return home due to World War I. So when did the Wildlife Conservation Society apologize for his treatment along with the thousands of others? 2020. Yeah, took long enough. Stolen election, ballot fraud. These are phrases that get thrown around a lot nowadays, but I'm going to tell you about one election that was 100% rigged, and it took place in Liberia in 1927. It took place between Charles D.B. King of the True Whig Party and the opposition's Thomas J. Faulkner, representing the People's Party. Now, according to the National Elections Commission, 15,000 people cast their votes, and in the end, King was re-elected for his third term, with 240,000 votes. Yes, you heard me right, out of 15,000 people, he received 240,000 votes, which gives me the impression it was maybe a little bit rigged. Guinness World Records thought so, naming it the most rigged election of all time, and things became even worse shortly after. Almost immediately after the election, the League of Nations ordered investigations due to an accusation by Faulkner that members of the True Whig Party were using slave labor at home, along with selling slaves to then Spanish colony of Fernando Po, and also involving the Liberian army in the process. While the allegations could not be fully proven, it was established that both King and Vice President Allen Yancey were profiting from forced labor, which is equivalent to slavery. If you were wondering about the outcome, during their investigation, King and Yancey got the right idea and decided to resign. Charity is always a good idea. Knowing there are people in positions worse than you and benefiting them with even the smallest bit of help can really make people's day. But as most of the areas Mansa Musa traveled through found out, too much charity can sometimes be a bad thing. The ruler of Mali from 1312 to 1337 CE, Musa expanded territory and brought in architects from all over Africa and the Middle East to help assemble his empire. Due to Mali's natural resources and Musa's establishment of certain trade routes, he became a very wealthy man, with some estimating his wealth being higher than Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos. But Musa wanted to share his wealth, and so with a caravan of hundreds of thousands of people and thousands of pounds of gold, he traveled through North Africa and the Middle East, leaving wealth wherever he went. But what happens when there's an overabundance of gold? It starts to lose its worth. And so while people loved their riches and gold, things became more expensive, including his home of Egypt, where it took 12 years for their economy to recover once he returned following his pilgrimage. His impact was profound, but did he do it with of kindness, or did he do it to ruin economies and ensure he remained in rule? We'll never know. I'm hoping it was just because he was a nice guy. You have every right to think tigers are cool animals, but I might shift your opinions with the story of the Maneater of Champawat. Operating with the highest precision and ability ever seen by a big cat, the Maneater claimed the lives of 436 people throughout India and Nepal during its 7-year run of terror, leaving entire villages afraid to leave their homes. Tigers will rarely hunt humans in the wild, but this was shortly after the English had started colonizing the area, reducing its habitat and eliminating its prey, meaning it had to turn to a harsher and more human-based diet. And despite their best efforts, no one could tame the beast. The English government sent bounty hunters to no avail, police and army troops tried and failed capturing the tiger, and so as fear mounted, the tiger became a source of embarrassment for English officials. They set a bounty on him, which led to the killings of tens of thousands of others, but they couldn't conquer the Maneater, until the introduction of one man, Jim Corbett. Corbett spent days with native villagers until a woman was taken away by the beast and he had a trail, and finally, through bushes and multiple rounds, the Maneater's rampage was over, and Corbett was a hero. So he took the skin of the cat, which he had taxidermied as a prize, and went on to hunt the next big beast, which he would do for the rest of his life. Now I know I'm shocked about these, but what about you? Let us know which surprised you the most in the comments below, and leave a like. For Bumblebee, I'm Ethan, and I'll see you in the next one.